We begin with a monumental Thursday that will go down in the history books, with continuing developments this afternoon as we watch a criminal contempt vote against Attorney General Eric Holder. Republican lawmakers seeking to make Mr. Holder the first Attorney General to be held in contempt, capping a months-long political spectacle over the Fast and Furious operation. And with what could be seen as curious timing, it comes within hours of the Supreme Court's decision on the President's health care reform, a decision that marks a pivotal moment in the 2012 campaign, vindicating the President's major legislative achievement and an issue that has roiled this turbulent election year.
It should be pretty clear by now that I didn't do this because it was good politics. I did it because I believed it was good for the country. The highest court in the land has now spoken. We will continue to implement this law, and we'll work together to improve on it where we can. But what we won't do, what the country can't afford to do, is refight the political battles of 2 years ago or go back to the way things were.
Indeed, it was the decision and majority opinion of Bush-appointed Chief Justice Roberts which swung the court in the President's favour, holding up the individual mandate as a tax, quote, "In this case, however, it is reasonable to construe what Congress has done as increasing taxes on those who have a certain amount of income but choose to go without health insurance. Such legislation is within Congress's power to tax." And in his remarks today, the President took pains to point out that the mandate was once beloved by Republicans, including one Mitt Romney.
Even though I knew it wouldn't be politically popular and resisted the idea when I ran for this office, we ultimately included a provision in the Affordable Care Act that people who can afford to buy health insurance should take the responsibility to do so. In fact, this idea has enjoyed support from members of both parties, including the current Republican nominee for president.
Well, not so much anymore. Indeed, the President's rival wasted no time in tacking his repeal and replace banner to the front of his podium and casting healthcare reform as a job-killing big government pariah.
Obamacare is a job killer. Businesses across the country have been asked what the impact is of Obamacare. 3/4 of those surveyed by the Chamber of Commerce said Obamacare makes it less likely for them to hire people. If we want good jobs and a bright economic future for ourselves and for our kids, we must replace Obamacare.
Mr. Romney there serving as mouthpiece for big business lobbyists, some of whom may join Donald Trump as guests at Romney's Pierre Hotel fundraiser this evening. But wait a second, with what would you replace it, Mr. Romney? Never mind. In the biggest surprise since John Roberts joined the left of the court, Romney did not take any questions. And while Mr. Romney engages in the politics of vagary and fundraising, while the House holds a vote that even its own members say is meaningless, there is one politician today who appeared to have perspective about why actually governing can be meaningful and important.
Whatever the politics, today's decision was a victory for people all over this country whose lives will be more secure because of this law and the Supreme Court's decision to uphold it. Their sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers, who will not have to hang their fortunes on chance. These are the Americans for whom we passed this law.
Well said, Mr. President. Let's get to our panel now. From Philadelphia, Lehigh University professor and director of Africana Studies, James Peterson, who's also a blogger for the Huffington Post. And with us from Washington, MSNBC political analyst, former DNC communications director Karen Finney, who's now a columnist for The Hill, and Democratic strategist Julian Epstein, former chief counsel for the House Judiciary Committee. Julian, I have to congratulate you on your foresight, because you have consistently said that you believe the mandate would be upheld, and you've been proven absolutely right. How did this happen, given that the Solicitor General in those 3 days of oral arguments was criticised? People said he choked, he couldn't even drink his water properly, and then today you have this decision by the Supreme Court. What happened?
Well, I think the media did a woefully bad job covering this. Everybody covered this as exclusively an issue about the Commerce Clause. The Justice Department and many of the lower cases argue that it was not just the Commerce Clause, it was the taxing authority. We have thousands of provisions in the tax code. If somebody doesn't get married, if somebody doesn't have a kid, there are arguably tax penalties. So there's nothing new about this, as the Chief Justice pointed out. It is a huge victory for the tens of millions of Americans that have no or inadequate health care. It's a huge victory for Obama, not just a political victory. It shows him as a very strong person, and it is an unbelievable slap down by a conservative-led court of the theory that has been the opponents have used against Obama, which is that he is a socialist and he's acting in an extra-constitutional way. A conservative Supreme Court today said the Tea Party, all of the critics that Obama has been subjected to so unfairly, all of them are wrong. It was just a huge slapdown. It's the second one this week.
But, Karen, before you celebrate this, isn't there a rich irony here? When the administration tried to sell health care reform, they studiously avoided using the term tax, anxious about Republicans who, as you know, regard tax as a swear word, and yet the individual mandate has been upheld as a tax.
There is an irony to it, absolutely. But I think what Julian said is important. But on the flip side, it's not just that it's a smackdown. Think about the three major decisions we had this week. In each of these cases, the court reaffirmed the power of the federal government. And for how many times have the Tea Partiers and all those folks on the right been trying to undermine the authority of this president? You have the right-wing court, now a right-wing-led court, basically reaffirming the authority of this president and his actions during his term as president. I think that is incredibly important for the president, whether you call it a tax, as the tax that Mitt Romney has now also imposed on folks in Massachusetts when he was governor.
Indeed. Absolutely. Dr. Peterson, Mitt Romney, speaking of him, offered another statement. Of course, he can't take a single question, but he repeats his plan to repeal the law. But given that this will embrace 30 million people who don't currently have insurance, that it means pre-existing conditions won't allow insurance companies to drop them. Doesn't Romney have to come up with something like an alternative, or do you think he's going to treat healthcare like he does immigration? I don't like the president's policies, but I haven't got a single constructive idea of my own.
Yeah, it's going to be Romney as usual here, Martin. There's no. First of all, he doesn't have a plan to replace this particular plan. He was hoping that he was going to become out a winner today. Obviously, that's not the case. At the end of the day, remember also that what he refers to as Obamacare is also the same as Romney care. And what you're seeing here, when you look at the juxtaposition of Romney's comments versus the president's comments, is President Obama actually cares about people. He actually cares about the challenges that people face on a day-to-day basis with respect to their health care, and this is why he did something that was not politically expedient in trying to make this and putting this law into practice. Romney is only talking about constituencies and political expediencies in his comments, so that juxtaposition to me was very, very striking today.
That's an interesting point you make, Dr. Peterson. Julian, even without his own healthcare plan, the Romney campaign is bragging, and I get this, they've raised more than $1.5 million
that's exactly what I'm
off the decision today with the hashtag full repeal. Yeah. And he hasn't even gotten to the Pierre penthouse yet. What do you say to that?
Well, this is a fool's errand for conservatives.
But is the man so stupid about how this looks? I mean, this looks absurd. The president is visiting Walter Reed Hospital, attending to people who have been injured, wounded warriors, and this man's proclaiming the fact he's raised $1.5 million because of the Supreme Court.
Well, and this is a fool's errand for conservatives. This is absolutely the last word on health care. There is no chance, let me repeat again, no chance that this law will ever be repealed. Let me just give you two reasons for that. Mitt Romney himself has not one time, but numerous times endorsed the use of tax penalties to go at free riders. Let me just quote to you what he wrote in 2007. Right. Using tax penalties as we did, or tax credits as others have proposed, encourages free riders to take responsibility for themselves rather than pass their medical costs on to others. That is Mitt Romney writing an op-ed piece. He is on record time time after time talking about exactly what the court has identified with respect to tax penalties. That's one. Point two is many Republicans now are on record supporting many of the provisions of the health care reform. For example, the prescription drug donut hole closing, the pre-existing conditions.
Indeed.
There are subsidies for businesses and middle class. So with Republicans being on record supporting that, you can't simply have a one-page repeal. There's too many provisions that they want to support. That means one page, as David Frum has pointed out, one page becomes 50 pages real quickly. There's just no chance they will get a legislative repeal through.
Please, Karen.
If I could also just add, I mean, there are a couple things in terms of the politics of this. Mitt Romney now has to campaign. Two problems for him. Number one, as Julian just pointed out, this is yet another reversal. It plays into the narrative that we're already seeing really take root for Mitt Romney, that he is a flip-flopper, that he is someone who will say or do anything to get elected. So he's going to, whether or not he explains himself, that narrative is taking root. We're seeing that in the polling. Number two, he and the Republicans, when they do their repeal action next week, they now have to go to people and explain why they are taking something away. It's like 6 million young people now covered under the Affordable Care Act. They're asking to take that away without telling you what you're going to get in return. That's the choice Americans face now.
And Dr. Peterson, to you.
Yes.
To your point, Dr. Peterson, the president presented himself as wanting to include everybody, using this device to provide health care for all, so that people who pay are not penalized by those who don't pay. What is Mitt Romney's alternative, apart from the prototype that he gave the president in Massachusetts?
He absolutely has no alternative here. In fact, Republicans have no alternative. I didn't hear Representative Cantor or Representative Boehner talk about any kind of alternative in terms of this vote they want, this crazy vote they want to have next week to try to repeal it again. They're playing politics, and the president's interested in people and policies. He actually cares about what's going on, and that's a very, very striking thing. There are other hidden pieces here as well, because if you look at the vote, you also see that all the women on the court voted in favor of this, because women have intimate connections to the value and the importance of health care, and those choices that President Obama makes shows the American people the value of a president's pick to the court. So there are a lot of wins here that are not even necessarily on the table in terms of our discussions, but the distinction here is, do you care about people, do you care about politics?
Indeed. As my mother would say, women are always smarter.